Hi there, welcome to Daily Storyteller. Today, I'm here to help you fall asleep, so before we get started, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know where you're from, what time you're watching, and how comfortable you are. Then, let's start part 1. It was the summer of 2016, the kind of summer when the days seemed to go on forever and the air was heavy with warmth. 3 friends, Emma, a nature-loving photographer, Mark, a quiet but perceptive history teacher, and Lucas, an outgoing freelance writer, made the decision to spend a weekend away from the bustle of the city. They reserved a secluded cabin in the dense Oregon woods, far from the distractions and noise of their everyday lives. The drive took hours, winding through roads that became more isolated and narrow by the mile. Lucas's happy chatter filled the quiet. Mark flipped through an old book about local legends while seated in the rear. Mark held up his book as Emma, in the passenger seat, browsed through her phone for hiking trails close to the cabin. Locals tell about odd disappearances and think these woods are haunted. Nighttime whispers that are unmarked the graves. Emma rolled her eyes as Lucas laughed, but she felt a chill go up her spine. Let's just concentrate on unwinding, okay? No scary. It was a classic ghost story, ideal for a weekend trip. The GPS signal went out tonight as they got closer to their destination, and the tall trees that had grown to cover the road replaced it. The sun started to set, illuminating the sky with red and gold hues. When they got there, the cabin stood alone, its wooden frame blending into the surrounding forest. This location is ideal, Emma remarked while taking a picture of the rustic facade. The cabin was comfortable but eerily quiet, with old but sturdy furniture and faded photographs of people who appeared to be watching the walls. The living room was dominated by a fireplace, with a stack of firewood neatly piled next to it. Little did they know that their weekend of solitude would soon turn into a night of terror. There are just 2 bedrooms, so Emma looked around the rooms while Lucas built a fire. Who's sharing? I'll take the couch, she yelled. As they unloaded, Emma saw something strange, a dusty journal stashed beneath the couch. The leather cover was cracked, and the pages were yellowed. She opened it to discover scrawled writings. Mark responded, placing his book on a table. It was only 2 nights. July 12, 1983. Once more, the whispers began. Something is watching me from the trees, and I can't sleep. Hey, look at this, Emma exclaimed, displaying the journal to the others. Lucas shrugged, presumably a child trying to frighten himself, but Mark's face clouded or he mumbled a warning to himself more than to anybody else. They played cards, joked, and prepared dinner that evening. Lucas dismissed it, but when Mark went to the window, there was nothing outside but darkness and the faint outline of trees swaying in the breeze. The tension from the journal diminished until the first sound came, a soft knock on the window, faint but deliberate. Did you hear Emma whispering, her voice barely audible over the crackling fire? It was probably an animal. Mark got a torch and went out onto the porch as the knocking increased in volume and came from the opposite side of the cabin. The beam of light pierced the darkness, exposing nothing, and the woods were extremely quiet. With a trembling voice, Emma dragged Mark back inside and whispered, "Let's just lock the doors and stay together." They fled the house and huddled in the living room, where the previous merriment had given way to an uncomfortable silence. Emma gripped the journal and flipped through other entries. I heard footsteps around the cabin on July 15th, but they stopped when I looked, and I could sense them watching me wait. By midnight, the cabin's air felt stifling, and a chill went through the room as the fire flickered and dimmed. When Emma noticed a figure standing still at the tree line, its silhouette just discernible in the moonlight, she muttered, "There's someone out there," because she couldn't get rid of the feeling that they were being watched. Lucas reached into the fireplace and took out a poker. When Mark shone the torch through the window, the figure was no longer there. They moved as one, crawling towards the sound, while the knocking came back louder and more insistently from the back door. When they heard the murmuring coming from all around them, Lucas yanked the door wide, prepared to meet whatever was there, but the porch was empty. Like a breeze carrying voices, faint and hazy with a trembling voice, Emma moved away and clutched the journal, saying, "It's in here." The lights inside the cabin flickered, bringing it close to darkness. As the fire fought to stay alive, shadows danced over the walls. "We need to exit the room now," so Mark kept the torch steady while he looked around, but the front door wouldn't move. It seemed like something was keeping it closed. As the muttering intensified, Lucas swung the poker at nothing but air. Ima shrieked as a shadow swept over the wall without any light coming from it, and the journal fell out of her hands. The last entry landed open on the floor, staring back at her. July 20th, "It won't let me go. If you discover this, it's too late." When Mark hurried to investigate after hearing a loud boom from the bedroom, he discovered the window broken and Lucas' bed unoccupied. Emma sobbed, but no one responded. When they got to the car, the keys were gone, so Mark said firmly, despite the tears in his eyes, "We have to go back." Emma whispered, "No, we can't," as the cabin loomed in the distance, its windows glowing faintly. The laughter paused for a moment, and then there was a knock from the car window. Part 2. It was late August 2018, the kind of summer when the air felt heavy as if the world was holding its breath. The whispers turned to cold, mocking laughter, and Emma and Mark ran for the back door this time, and it opened, revealing the dark woods. Three companions Ethan came up with the idea to spend the weekend camping in the remote Ashwood forest with Chloe because he wanted to get away from the busy city life and get back in touch with nature. As a project manager, Natalie was the pragmatic one who never left her checklist behind. Chloe was a free spirit who was constantly looking for adventure. Together, they made the ideal trio, with Ethan serving as the group's trustworthy and upbeat glue. They parked their car at the edge of the forest and hiked with their baggage packed tightly as the forest stretched out in front of Miles, with its ancient and dense trees. Before they lost phone coverage, Ethan took the lead and used his navigation app to find directions. "This location is amazing." Twirling, Chloe said the sun glowed on the forest floor beneath the tree canopy, but the farther they went, the darker it got. By late afternoon, they arrived at a clearing with perfect flat ground, encircled by tall pines and a small stream. They set up their tents and made a fire, and as the sun set, I read that Ashwood Forest is said to be haunted. Chloe made fun of the fire by jabbing at it with a stick and saying something about odd lights and missing hikers. On the first night, Ethan smiled and said, "Every forest has its legends, let's not scare ourselves," but Natalie detected something strange. There was an odd, deafening silence in the forest, with neither rustling leaves nor chirping insects. They cooked marshmallows and told stories under the sky during the first few quiet hours. Chloe performed music. Around midnight, the roaring fire cast shadows that swirled around them softly on her speaker. Ethan and Chloe stayed up a little longer, savoring the silence, but then there was a faint stirring in the trees. Natalie sighed and stretched, saying, "I'm calling it a night." She then retreated to her tent. Ethan stopped looking into the darkness and questioned, "Did you hear that?" Chloe shrugged, presumably to calm an animal, but as the rustling got louder, Ethan reached for his torch and shone it at the trees, but all he saw were shadows. When they eventually arrived at their tents, the sound ceased as suddenly as it had begun. Natalie was already sound asleep, but Ethan was awake, reliving the sound in his head. It wasn't an animal sound, rather, it had a rhythm similar to footfall at approximately 3 in the morning. A faint sound roused Natalie. Her heart pounded as she tried to hear the incomprehensible but persistent murmur outside her tent, and suddenly it ceased. After breakfast, they decided to explore the forest and follow the stream, which Ethan suggested would be enjoyable. The stream led them deeper into the forest, where the trees grew thicker and the air felt colder, but the unease persisted despite the silence returning heavier than before morning. Chloe observed, "It's strange," as she traced the circle with jagged lines on an ancient carved symbol on a tree. "What do you think it means?" When they returned to camp in the late afternoon, the clearing felt different, as if the forest had moved slightly. Natalie noticed deep scratches in the dirt near their tents that hadn't been there before, and as night fell, the uneasiness turned to fear. She felt watched, but she didn't see anyone. The whine carried a faint whisper that sounded almost like laughter. Natalie's eyes darted to every sound as she gripped her torch, and then there was a tremendous snap that reverberated across the area. Ethan leaped to his feet, his torch shining into the trees. "Who was there?" he called, but got no answer. A towering, human-shaped figure appeared at the edge of the light, but the shadows clung to it as though it had absorbed the darkness. Natalie cried out. The 3 friends were gathered close when Ethan tossed a rock at the apparition, but it had no effect. Hearts thumping, the figure moved ahead, and Ethan yelled as they ran into the woods, their torch beams bouncing wildly. The woodland appeared to go on forever, with trees closing in on them and the sound of footsteps growing louder behind them. Ethan pulled Chloe up and urged her to keep going when she stumbled and cried out as she hit the ground. When Natalie looked back, she saw a shadowy figure moving strangely quickly, its limbs jerking, and they arrived at the stream panting. "We must continue," Ethan said in a trembling voice, but the creature was standing across the river, its face featureless, its body hardly solid, and it made a low, growling sound. Desperate to protect his friends, Ethan grabbed a fallen branch and swung it, but the figure didn't flinch. Instead, it moved closer, suffocating Natalie's torch before it went out. The only thing that broke the darkness was the faint light of the moon. The friends staggered blindly, their breath coming in short gasps, but they managed to return to the clearing, their tents ripped apart. Ethan yelled as they ran, never stopping. Until they reached the edge of the forest, where the car was. The jungle was calm once more when Ethan tried to start the engine, but the figure was watching from just outside the woods. When the whispers came back, they were louder and came from all directions. When the sun rose and the figure gradually disappeared in the light, Natalie covered her ears, but it didn't help. When they eventually left, they didn't talk, and the forest felt like a bad dream, but the scratches on their car were very real. To this day, none of them discuss what happened in Ashwood Forest, but they all agree that they will never camp again. In part 3, it was October 2019, and the air was crisp and cold. Ryan and his 4 co-workers. Ryan recommended that Claire, Devin, and Mia explore the abandoned warehouse 2 blocks away instead of going home after finishing a late shift at their marketing agency. "Come on," he said with a cheeky smile, "it's almost Halloween. Let's do something spooky." Skeptic Claire rolled her eyes. "Why would we travel to a site that has been condemned?" Devin, who is always looking for excitement, grinned because, unless you're afraid, it's pleasant. The warehouse loomed in the distance, its silhouette jagged against the cloudy sky. It had once been a bustling factory, but it had been abandoned for decades after a fire destroyed its interior, and the locals whispered about strange happenings. Mia hesitated, clutching her jacket tighter. She wasn't one for scary adventures, but she didn't want to be the odd one out. As they stood before the rusted gate, their voices resounded in the darkness, and shadows moved where no light could reach them. Last chance to back out, Ryan pulled out a torch. He teased no one, and when the gate creaked open, the sound reverberated into the quiet street. They entered the warehouse without knowing what lay ahead in the dark, and the smell of decay filled the air as they walked across the cracked concrete floor. Under Ryan's torch, rows of rusting machinery and heaps of rubbish covered the large area, creating eerie shadows. Mia remained near Claire, her gaze flickering uneasily. "This place feels wrong," she said. "Calm down." Devon's voice was echoing off the walls. Despite the fact that it's only an old structure, Ryan, the ringleader, was uneasy about there were no rodents running around or wind rustling through broken windows, just a thick, suffocating silence that didn't belong. CLA halted as they heard a faint clattering sound, perhaps just debris dropping, followed by stillness. Even though his voice lacked conviction, Ryan said, "I showed my torch to the noise, but I saw nothing." They went deeper into the building, and as they turned a corner, they discovered a door slightly ajar. Devon said, "Let's check it out," and as they did, they found a smaller room with dusty shelves and scattered papers on the far wall with words scrawled in red paint. "Okay, this is officially not fun anymore," Mia gasped, but his hold on the torch tightened, and the clattering so Death reported in an employee incident. "This is what happened on October 12, 1981. Peering over his shoulder fire, Claire asked. "Ryan mentioned that I had read about an accident involving a worker whose body was never discovered and that the room's temperature appeared to drop." "I don't think we should be here," Mia said, rubbing her arms and looking towards the door. The door they entered slammed shut, Mia screamed, and Ryan yanked the handle, but it remained stuck. Then, the lights flickered dim, pale lights that shouldn't have been working in an abandoned building. Devon ignored her and continued to flip through the ledger, muttering about strange noises and workers quitting. The shadows dancing on the walls weren't part of the group, but CLA pointed out a tall, strange shadow that moved across the far wall. Devon left the group hurried out of the room, their panic accelerating their pace. The warehouse felt like a maze, with its pathways twisting and turning indefinitely, and the clattering sound followed them, now accompanied by faint whispers from anyone there. When Ryan shouted and spun around with his flashlight, the beam struck a towering person at the end of the corridor, its face hidden by shadow, and it didn't flee. They ran down the hall while Claire shouted and pulled Mia with her, but the figure was always there, barely out of reach, but never falling behind. As the whispers became more audible, they slammed the door behind them and rushed into another room, sounding like a sinister chant. Only their labored breathing remained after the whispers ceased. I don't know what Ryan said while resting against the wall, but Mia was crying uncontrollably. "It's not human." After Devon's torch flickered, the darkness descended. When the lights returned, Mia shrieked as a cold hand touched her shoulder. Where was she, CLA? Her voice broke as she yelled, and they looked around in a panic, but she was nowhere to be found. The figure then reappeared at the doorway, its shadow extending towards them in an odd and prolonged manner. They staggered into the main hall while Ryan roared and pulled Claire towards another exit. The gate could be seen through the smashed windows, and the dim glimmer of the streetlights was evident. Freedom was only a few paces away, but Ryan halted as they came to the street and asked, "Where's Devon?" CLA turned, but the warehouse was empty and dark, with no clattering or whispers. They never discussed what had happened to anyone, not even to each other.